Hello, hello. Welcome in, everybody.
Hello.
Happy Tuesday, everybody. We'll just give it a few more minutes and then we will go ahead and get started.
I always like to see where people are coming from. So if you'd like to drop where you're at in the chat, that would be great. I'm in the Baltimore, Maryland area of the United States.
I'm in California. So I feel like we're so far apart, but at the same time, you're sitting right next to me, which is very cool.
Full of technology.
What's the weather like where you guys are at? It is hot here. Today, we're going to be at a beautiful 103.
To about 90 here in Baltimore.
That sounds very lovely. I would take that right now.
Yeah, so what's 90 Fahrenheit, which is about, I think, 30 Celsius.
40 degrees Celsius is too much. I feel like that's where I'm at.
There is in Ohio. I've been to Ohio many times.
I don't think I've been to Ohio. Maybe for like a band event. Ohio sounds very familiar.
Worked for Progressive Insurance for a long time, which is in Mayfield Village, Ohio. Lived there
Oh,
about 25 times.
dang, that's a lot.
That's a lot.
Right, we still got a few people trickling in right now, so we can give it one more minute and then we can go ahead and get started. Appreciate everybody being here today. All right, so let's go ahead and we'll get started here as more people come in. So just wanted to say hello to everybody. Welcome to today's masterclass session with Transifex. It is Tuesday, June 11th, and I'm Veronica, the customer success team lead here, and I'll be the host for this session. And we're excited to have you all here with us today. So today we'll be embarking on a journey to enhance translation quality with advanced translation checks, and leading us through today's insightful exploration is one of our customer success managers, Ryan. Some of you probably already know him, and we appreciate him presenting for us today. So at Transifex, our mission is to lift the language barrier and engage the world. And with Ryan's expertise, we're deep diving into tools and techniques to help elevate your translation quality. But before we dive in, remember to use the chat bubble for any questions. Your engagement here is invaluable to us, so please feel free to share any insights, ask all the questions. There are no questions too small here. And as always, we know your time is valuable, and we appreciate you all for being here today. So if you need to step away for any reason, today's session will be recorded and emailed to you all after this. So with that being said, Ryan, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Veronica, and welcome, everybody. Before we dive into the agenda, I'd quickly like to discuss who this training is for and why it's important to them. So again, we're talking about advanced translation checks, And so this training is for anybody who is concerned about translations honoring specific ways of translating content. So one example of that is ensuring that all HTML tags in the source are kept in the translations in order to not break the formatting of text or the layout of a page. If you're not too familiar with what I just said here, so on an HTML page or a Word document, bolded text is indicated by just some characters, a less than sign, a B, and then a greater than sign. And that tag surrounds whatever words you want to make bolded. So to ensure that formatting stays, you want to make sure that those tags, that B tag, exists in the translation. So that's just one example of why you might want to use these translation checks. So this training is important for a variety of reasons, because you want to ensure that translations honor certain criteria. And some of those examples include those HTML tags we just talked about, or maybe there are URLs in the source string. So you want to make sure that the number of URLs exist in the translation, the same number as in the source. Or maybe you have character limits set for certain strings, so you want to make sure those are respected. Similar for glossary terms. Or maybe you just want to ensure that translations do not contain only spaces. So it must be a real translation. So this training will enable a greater understanding of the ways to automatically ensure that specific conditions are met in translations. And we're going to break this topic down into two parts. So first, we'll talk about how to configure translation checks, and then we'll talk about how those translation checks behave. So let's talk about the first part here, configuring translation checks. There are three main types of checks: generic, custom, and on-demand, and there are a couple different types of custom checks. But let's go ahead and talk about the first one first, which is generic checks, and then we'll talk about the custom and on-demand checks. So the generic or default translation checks. So the first thing to keep in mind is that you must be an organization administrator. So these settings are on the organization's settings page. So you must be an org admin to get to those. Another thing to keep in mind is that each file format has its own set of generic or default translation checks. So we support many different file formats, 45 or 50, something like that. And so whether that's Word files or HTML files or JSON files, so lots of different file formats. In order for source strings to get into our system, it must conform to one of our file formats. And each one of those has its own set of default checks. Then the last point to keep in mind is that each translation check can either be set to an error warning or it can be turned off altogether. And we will take a look at this in just a little bit. But to get to these translation checks, you're going to navigate your organization settings, select translation checks. Also, it's important to keep in mind that in our current UI, they're called translation checks, but in our newer UI, we call fresh, which some of you may have seen, they are called QA checks. So translation checks, QA checks, that's the same thing. That's what we're talking about here. The screenshot just shows an example of some of these generic checks that are pre-configured for Microsoft Word files, otherwise known as docx files. And again, we will take a look at this in just a moment. So configuring these, now we're going to move on to the custom translation checks. We'll take a look at these generic ones when we do a live demo here coming up shortly. So we're going to move on to the custom translation checks first. So custom translation checks, first of all, you can set these using custom variables or placeholders. If you use custom variables in your code, and if you're not familiar with what a variable is, it's kind of developer speak, but an example is if you're doing like someone logs into your website and you say, hi, whoever the logged in user is. So that whoever the logged in user is represented by a variable. It could be like @name or %s or whatever it is. So the string is hi, that %s or hi @name or however you define that variable. Again, you can configure that here so that we respect that and the translator will not translate that. We want to make sure that that variable is kept in the translation so that it can be replaced at runtime with the correct user or whatever that variable is for. So if you use custom variables, you can set up custom translation checks to make sure they're left untouched in the translation. And this is done by specifying either the exact characters your variables consist of, which we call custom variables, or you can specify the characters your custom variables start and end with. And we call those placeholders. They work the same way. It's just whether they begin and end with the same set of characters or whether you specify the exact characters. And if neither one of those will suit your purpose, then we also support regular expressions. Again, this is more of a developer thing, and regular expressions can get complicated, but just know that it can be used for exact pattern matching. So no matter what the pattern is, maybe you want to search for an email in a string. It can find that email no matter what it looks like. That email always contains certain parts, an @ symbol, a dot, and things. So you can create a regular expression to ensure that it exists. So another couple of examples of regular expressions are for ensuring that a translation doesn't have consecutive duplicate words, or maybe you want to ensure that bolded text gets wrapped with double quotes, or double asterisks rather. So instead of HTML, some formats use like 2 asterisks to surround something that you want to make bold. And so you want to make sure that if that exists in the source string, that it also exists in the translation, those double asterisks. So that's one example, another example of a regular expression. And now we're going to see how to get to these. So to set these custom variables and placeholders, you're going to click on that file format that we saw up here, whatever file format you're talking about. You click on your file format. Then you're going to click at the bottom of the list of default or generic checks. The last one will have a link for setup custom placeholders. So you click that to get to this pop-up window that you see here. And then the pop-up here at the top for placeholders, you can provide that start and end value, and Transifex will try to detect text that starts and ends with those specified characters. And then if your variable doesn't start and end with a certain pattern, then you can enter the exact pattern below. So to look for exact matches like that at name or percent temperature or whatever it is, you can enter that in the enter a custom variable field, and we will look for that match. Now moving on to regular expressions before we go and look at the site for how this works. So again, you're going to click on your file format that we saw above, and then you're going to click the add a translation check. So rather than clicking set up custom placeholders, you click add a translation check to get to these regular expressions pop up. You'll see in the screenshot below. And the first thing you'll do here is you're going to provide a description. And this description is important because this is what's displayed in the editor if your rule is violated. So you want to make it make sense for the trends that are looking at it. If they incur this violation, they'll know how to fix it. So that description is very important. Then you'll enter your regular expression there. Again, these can be a little bit more complicated, so just ping your favorite friendly developer. They should be able to help you out, or if you need help, you can always reach us on our support channel, and we'll try and help you out. And the last configuration is if you want this check to run for only the translations, so you're not worried about what's in the source, you just want to make sure that this check passes for the translations only, or you can select translations and source strings. And then the translation check will fail if the matches found in the source string are different than the matches found in the translation. And then if you pick translations and source strings, then you can also select the setting to respect matching order. So the order of whatever it is must be the same between the source and the translation. And I see that we have one question here. That says you'll probably cover this later on, but is it possible to set up custom checks for specific languages within a project? The answer is no. These translation checks work at a file format level only, and that covers all languages and all projects. So it's at a file format level for now, but we thank you for that feedback. We will take that back to our product team and see what we can do. Okay. We'll move on here, and now we'll take a look at some code here. We'll go into the application. Okay, so to get to these translation checks, you're going to click on your little avatar icon at the bottom, go to organization settings. This is why you have to be an org admin, and then you click on translation checks on the left side. Again, this will be a little bit different in our new UI we call Fresh, but I'm going to show it where most people are still familiar with this UI. Now that you're in here, the first thing you'll see is at the top, these are the translation checks for your file formats that are currently in use in your organization. So I have a lot of them here. There are other file formats, which you can take a look at as well, but these ones down here are not being used. So if you want these to be used, you're going to come to the top here, enter your file formats. And we'll just take a look at the Microsoft Word files here. And these are the default translation checks. So each file format, conforms to are used for different reasons. So these generic checks are different for each type of file format. For HTML or for Word documents, they are HTML. They can't have HTML tags in them. So if you want to make sure that those tags exist, again, to preserve the formatting, then you want to make sure that this is set to an error. Errors are shown with a red exclamation point and a circle. Warnings are set with a yellow triangle with an exclamation point. And if you want to turn it off, that's denoted with a gray circle with an X in it. So these HTML tags are preserved and the translation is set to an error. So let's go take a look at this. So let's open up a Word document, a docx file. Let's come down to an example here. This will work. So we make sure we want to translate. We see HTML tags here, and if we hover, these are little placeholders. If you're not familiar with this, we hide those HTML tags from translators so they don't have to worry about translating non-translatable content. They can only focus on the translatable content. So if they come in here, try to translate it, we'll translate it with AI, should respect these tags, but maybe the translator is like, oh, I don't know what this weird placeholder is, let me remove them. So they come in here and they remove the tags. Then they try to save it. We'll see that there was an error and the translation will not be saved because the save translation is still blue. So it did not actually save the translation. So it's telling you that the tag is missing from the translation. So now the translator realizes that they've done something incorrectly. So then they need to fix it. So now they can come back in here, place their cursor wherever they want that tag, and they can just click the tag in the source string and now input that tag directly for you. So we'll come in here and this dash there, and then we'll click the closing one to put that back in there. And now we should be good to go. So I'm going to click Save Translation. And now we're able to save it because we fixed that translation check. Don't see any more questions, so I'll keep going. So those are the generic translation checks. And now we'll take a look at some of these custom checks. So we're going to take a look at a different file format here. Key value JSON is a common file format. And where that you get to these custom checks is click those manage placeholders. I already have, so this looks a little bit different from what I showed in the slide deck because I've already configured some custom translation checks, which is what the add a translation check link is for. But to get to these custom variables and placeholders, click manage placeholders. And here is where we enter these values. I'm going to make this a little smaller. Hopefully everybody can still see that. Let me know if that's okay. And here is where you have your placeholders, where if you have maybe the name is in between two open curly braces. It doesn't matter what's in between there, but opens and closes the two curly braces. You want to treat all of that as a variable. You enter it there. And if you enter it, let's just add one for just as an example. So two maybe opening hard brackets. So it'll input automatically if you saw the closing ones, because it has to be the matching pattern. Then you click allow white space, and we can add the placeholder or not. Oh, the placeholder already exists. Let's try a different one here. Okay, so now we've added another one. And then here's this enter a custom variable field. Like I have an example here at name. We're going to be whatever you want at name or %s or whatever it is. Maybe maybe 3 ats type. So we have a variable like that, placeholder. And that's also important to keep in mind that the order of these placeholders do matter. So if you have certain strings with just a single opening quote and one with a double opening quote, you're going to want to make sure that you order these correctly so that they'll work. So let's take a look at an example with like single and double quotes. So if we come over here, now I'm going to select a different resource. And let's see if I can find it or I can search for it. Here we go. Okay, so we'll see that these are being recognized. So there's two opening curly braces and two closing curly braces in here. Then we have one with a single opening of curly braces because I have these specified to match the double ones first before the single ones. So what would happen if we reverse this, for instance? So let's say So keep in mind what this looks like with two opening curly braces. The whole thing, the opening and curly braces are part of the variable, and then whatever is in there is part of it as well. So if we remove this, click apply. And if I refresh the page, now we can see it looks a little bit different. One of those braces are not part of it. So because we didn't define it correctly, we only defined one opening curly brace. So it did not include the second one in there. So that's why it's important to put these in the correct order. So let me come back here again. And so I'm just going to go ahead and remove that altogether. Now I'll show you what that looks like if I remove those curly braces altogether, the single and the double. And we see now it just looks like regular text because it's not being identified as a variable. So we come back in here, let's fix that. Double, add white space. I come back and add our single one again. Allow white space. Apply. Now we should see them being recognized again as a variable. So that is a way to make sure that they're going to stay, and it's working on translating that. I think I have these set to an error. Yeah, so I should have pointed out that for these custom variables and placeholders, you could set these as well to an error. Warning are turned off, mine are set to an error. So if I come in here and I try to save it without that, it's not going to work. Custom variable opening curly brace name is missing from your translation phrase. We'll come back here and fix that. Put my cursor where I want it, click the variable, and now we're good again. So that is custom variables and placeholders. And now we'll take a look at these regular expressions, which is down here for add a translation check. So I've already have some configured here. So let's take a look at one of these. Let's take a look at this simple one first. Let's take, so double quotes in the source and the translation must match. So if you have double quotes in the source, it must exist in the translation. So I'm going to grab a string that I have created already here. And we can test our translation check right from here too. So we click this test your translation check, and then we have to enter the source string as well as the translation. So double quotes in source in translation must match. So double quotes, these match here. So we can test it, and there's no problem with your translation. We're not looking for single quotes with this. We're just looking for double quotes. So they match. Now, if I come in here and I change this to single quotes instead of double quotes, now we should get a message. No, this is no problem. Well, because I had quotes in here already for this one. So it's all quotes for something. So now I'll just make them all single quotes. Oh. So now I have a bad message here, double quotes. So it's looking to see if it's it's looking to see if it's a single or double quote, I believe. So let's change how this works here. Good to go. All right, well, give this one more try here. It's possible I messed up the regular expression. It's all right. We're going to try a different one because I want to show you that this does work here. All right, so the type of quote, this is what I was looking at. The type of quote, single versus double must match. So let's try this again here. So paste this one in here and copy this one in here. So these don't match because this is a single quote over here and I have a double quote over here. So that's going to fail now. Okay, so sorry, I was looking at the wrong example there. So now we had a mismatch there between the single and double quotes. So if I go back and fix it, put in the single quotes for this second one here. Now we're good because the double quotes and the single quotes match between the two. Okay, so once we fix that, then we can enable it, which I've already done. And then let's see. All right, so you could also choose to respect the matching order as well. So I wanted to show you this one, the respect the matching order. So this is just checking if there are multiple trailing white spaces. If they are, the number must match. So check for multiple trailing white spaces. And I'm going to put one space at the end. I'm just going to copy this, enter this in the translation area. And it shouldn't match because I just copied it. But if I enter an extra space on the end of one of them, now we have a mismatch. Go back and fix it. Matches again. Whoop, didn't mean to do that. That's it. 2 at the end there, and I'll just put 1 at the end here. Now we'll have a mismatch between the source and the translation, so that's not a match. So that's what the respect matching order can do. Okay, let's see if there's any questions. I'm not seeing any questions. So I'm going to head back to our demo here. So the last item for this first part is our on-demand translation checks. So on-demand translation checks allow translation checks to be run on translations that have already been submitted. So what we were looking at before, translations entered in the editor, so they'll run right away. But if you've already done some translation work, and then you realize that you need a translation check to ensure something, you can set up that translation check and then run these on-demand checks to go back and check your existing work to see if it violates this constraint. So you can find this on-demand check on the settings page of a Transifex project. So you'll navigate to the settings page of a project, click on the workflow tab, scroll down to the quality assurance section, and then you can click on that check now link to run it on demand. And when that is finished, an email notification will be sent to the user who performed this action, whether that's org admins or project maintainers. They're the only ones with access to that settings page of a project. And then they'll see a detailed report, which includes the number of warnings and errors for each language. It finishes the first part that we want to talk about of configuring translation checks. So quickly, some key takeaways are that each file format has its own set of generic/default translation checks. Each translation check can be an error, warning, or turned off altogether. And there are 3 types of translation checks: generic/default, custom, or on demand. And take a quick pause here, see if there are any questions. I'm not seeing any. So then we'll move on to part 2. And part 2 is how these translation checks behave now that we've configured them. So there's a slight difference in the behavior between where the translation is applied in the editor versus anywhere else. And then we'll talk about also how to filter for a specific type of translation check, and then how to delete warnings. So in the editor, when translations are, which we've just seen, when translations are submitted through the editor, validation checks are triggered for that file format. The check has been set as a warning. Translators are allowed to save their translations. However, a warning message is displayed. So we can see the save changes is grayed out because it did save it. They just get a warning message that they might want to go look into this. However, if the check has been set as an error, translators will receive an error message instead, which prevents them from saving the translation until the condition of the translation check is met. So that is why the Save Changes button is blue, is because it did not actually save. They need to fix this translation check error before that they can save the translation. Now, what happens if the translation is submitted any other method? So other ways are if translation memory or machine translation translates the string, or translations are uploaded into our system from a file, or whether you call our API or use our CLI or Go client to upload translations or pass translations into the system. So when that happens, then the validation checks run in the background to identify if a rule has been violated. And no matter the message type, a warning or error, so even if it's an error, translations will still be saved in Transifex. However, they can later be found in the editor and fixed after applying the desired translation check filter. So you just go into the editor here under labels, label, say translation checks, and look for any errors or warnings. Now we have a couple of warnings we can go fix. Now we'll move on to filtering translation checks based on the type. So if you want to do that, you go into the editor and then select translation checks type and select glossary. So quickly back over here, instead of go to label, now we'll check translation check type and select glossary. Get rid of the warning. I don't think I have any glossary warnings right now, but that if you did have any glossary translation check violations, those would be listed here. Currently, glossaries is the only type of translation check that we allow for this filter. I anticipate others will be coming, but right now it's just glossaries. And the final thing that we want to talk about are deleting warnings. So users with reviewer permissions and up can delete warnings. Deleting a warning will hide the message for the specific translation for all users. However, if a new translation is submitted, the translation checks will run again. And if the translation violates the rules, the warnings will appear again. So you're just deleting that warning by clicking a little X on the warning and then clicking delete to remove that from all other users so they don't see that anymore. However, if the translation checks run again, that warning will come back. And that takes care of the second part. And that second part was pretty quick because we've already seen a lot of that in the demo earlier. But some key takeaways for how these translation checks behave are that where translations are submitted, aka the origin affects the behavior. If they're entered in the editor, the translation checks run when saving. If they're entered into the system any other method, then the checks run in the background, but the translations are still saved. Then you can filter for glossary type checks currently. Again, we anticipate more coming, but right now it's just glossary. And then you can also delete warnings. So reviewers and up can delete warnings to hide them from all users. Check the chat and the questions real quick, and I'm not seeing any questions. So that really wraps up today's topic. So quickly, this training should have enabled a greater understanding of the ways to automatically ensure that specific conditions are met in translations. And we learned how to set these translation checks and how these translation checks behave. Again, there's a slight difference between if the translations are entered in the editor versus if they're entered in our system any other method, whether that's translation memory, machine translation, file upload, etc. And that concludes, and I guess I will wait to see if there are any more questions or if anybody would like to see any more of how to configure these translation checks, please let me know. Seeing any questions right now. Give it just another minute or so. One thing I should have pointed out before is if you're changing these generic translation checks and you want to get back to the default settings because you might have messed something up, you can click this set to default translation checks, and that'll put things back the way it was initially before any changes were made. So these translation checks are very powerful for helping to ensure good quality translations. I think they're a little bit overlooked, but it is an important thing to keep in mind. You might want to go through all of your file formats and just verify that these default settings are the way that you would want them. Usually you always want to make sure that HTML tags are kept. You always want to make sure it's at least a warning for any of your file types. But again, it's good to go through each one of these and just see what you may want to adjust. Anticipating a couple of more questions. That's why I gave it some extra time here, but I'm not seeing any more questions.
All right, no worries. Well, just in case there's any more questions coming through, Ryan, just want to say big thanks for guiding us through today's session on enhancing translation quality and advanced translation checks. I think this was super helpful, and I hope everybody learned something new here today. So just in case anybody's typing up any last minute questions or anything like that, I want to thank everybody for your engagement during today's session. Before everyone dives back into your daily tasks, I'm about to send out a poll right now. There will be 3 questions, and these are simple yes or no answers. So please, if you guys could just take this quick poll, this really helps us with insights on how we're doing and things we can do to help our future sessions. So give me 1 second here while I go ahead and get these inputted, just in case anybody is still typing or has any other questions. There should be 2 there, and then just sending in the last one. All right, so just in case anybody is unaware, at the bottom where it says like chat questions, there should be a polls option, and that's where you'll see these 3 questions that I'm talking about right now. So while you all are doing that, additionally, just keep an eye on your email for a survey that's going to be sent to you guys with the recording. Any kind of further feedback and suggestion topics for future sessions are always helpful to us so we can make sure that we're on par with everyone, what you guys are looking for. And remember, our support team is always available, whether that's through email or you guys can use the chat widget in the editor. We're always here to assist you in anything you need. And then lastly here, I just want to talk about our Transifex community forum. Great place to connect with fellow users, share experiences, and uncover innovative ways to maximize your Transifex experience. And as we discussed last week, we did launch a Did You Know series offering insider tips and hidden gems to enhance your Transifex journey. So be sure to check that out. We'll be posting a new one today as well. So hopefully these tips and tricks can help you guys during your journey here with us. And just to make sure we don't have any other last minute questions, it looks like everything has been answered though. So with that, this concludes today's session. We're excited to see you all here at our last masterclass session of the series, which will be next week, same place, same time. And we will be doing a session with Sandy, who was our customer success engineer, where she'll be harnessing the power of the Transifex SDK. So until then, everybody take care. Thank you so much for joining us today. And again, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you, everybody, so much. Thank you, Ryan.
Bye, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.